welcome to the first stream that I've done on this channel in literally 1 year's time. Today, I'm going to be working on making some Halo 3 boots for one of our newest members. I am COL Fork, Commanding Officer of the Michigan Misfits Battalion. Let's get going. So, as you can see in Pepakara here, we've got the Halo 3 Mark 6 boot, and you can see on my workspace that I've got some pieces laid out. So these are the, we're not going to bother with these pieces for right now. Anyway, sorry, mildly distracted. These are going to be the toe pieces for the boot, and I like to arrange everything in such a way that it's going to end up being when it's all assembled, so I can at least get a somewhat basic visual idea of what I'm going to be working on. Make sure I grab the right knife. We're going to start off with this one, so that's going to actually get angled like that, because that's the actually what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the real fun bit. Do this one. Trying not to get my head in the way of anything so that you can all see exactly what it is that I'm doing. Okay, basically what I'm doing with this piece is it's this piece. And the best way, at least for me, to get that shape the way it's supposed to be with the nice lines and whatnot is I'm going to basically cut this piece up into 4 different pieces. For me, it makes it so much easier to do it that way than to try to bend it and this and that. It just ends up being a headache, and I really don't feel like dealing with that. So now that we have that, we do the fun cuts, and we're gonna bevel these because these have to have an angle to them. And if you're wondering why I'm doing several cuts, it's because I tend to get a smoother line. In fact, I'm missing, or I should probably snap off that particular blade because it's getting kind of dull, much like my sense of humor. But I keep sidetracking. I do that very easily. But since these have to be at a corner, I cut them off, and this would be the easiest part to cut them off from. And see, that's still not quite enough, so I'm gonna have to still bevel this side as well. It doesn't have to be an exact 90-degree angle, however, it needs to be a sharper angle than what it currently is. So I cut that off and I check it, I compare it to the model. It looks about right. And since this is going to have to be a 0.2, do the same thing to that piece, because that's going to, this piece is evident, or eventually, that's the word I was looking for. And now see, that's the right angle for that. So this being like this is going to be, I'm going to come back over here. Now I shouldn't really need to do anything to that little piece, which is great because it's really annoying and difficult to work with small pieces, especially when you're someone with larger hands. Okay. Always be sure you know where your snapped blades are at all times, because you really don't want to have a run-in with them later, especially if you're working on the floor. So that's there. Now see, I should cut that one a little bit too sharply, but a little too sharply is okay, because you can always fudge it when you put it together, because you can adjust it. It's harder to do it when you don't cut it steep enough or sharp enough. Because then you're forcing material and etc., etc., etc. Now this is a brand new glue gun. So it may take a minute for it to work properly. Second, see if I can't get my desk fan rolling. Now, you can't see it in frame, but I have a desk fan right here. Working with the hot glue, it helps expedite the process of the cooling, so that I don't have to sit here for hours on end just sitting and waiting for something to dry. You know, a lot of people use different things, adhesives. I prefer hot glue. It's cheaper, it's easier to use, it's more plentiful. And it works pretty well. And one thing I always recommend is, and I learned this, so it's not like I came up with the idea. When you're gluing, especially the longer of an area you are gluing, do it in small sections at a time because you're less apt to botch it, to put it nicely. I've been victim to that myself many a time. I've seen friends do it. It's just one of those things that you don't think about unless you've done it before, and a lot of people don't necessarily say that when they're teaching people. So I kind of just want to put that out there that you're gonna have to, you're gonna want to watch out for something like that because it's no fun trying to juggle a long piece and try to have all the pressure that you need and all the places all at the same time. It's a headache, and you can save that, and a lot of times you even get a better turnout anyway, just in pure shape to when doing that, as opposed to trying to do it all at once. These are always the not so exciting part of building. Now I've got this is a project that I need to have done in less than a month, and so it's a pretty lofty goal, quite honestly, but sometimes you gotta push yourself. Yeah, worst case scenario, it doesn't get done and we go to the next event, but me being me, I kind of want to try to get this done. Now see, one thing you can do when waiting for the piece to dry is kind of look at what you're going to be doing next. Okay, so I'm going to want that piece, and that particular piece is this piece right here. See, this is going to fit kind of like that. So I have to bend this piece in a few areas to get it to match up properly. So I need to take that, take that little wedge out, and see, now I can bend it and move it a lot easier to the position I'm going to need it in. See, and then I need to do the same thing from these 2 points. You definitely want to get it as straight as you can, but if you don't, you don't. It's not the complete end of the world, so. Let's see, now there's this piece, and I'm going to want to get recessed solid in there before too long. Let's sit there for a second. Okay, so now I need to do it from this point to that point. Where's the cursor? That's still tacky. Alright. And now when I'm doing this, I have the blade not all the way out, so that way I can have some sort of depth control, and I'm not gonna go through the entire thickness of the foam, because that just creates more of a headache later for a piece like this. The whole idea to doing this kind of a cut into the back is to, and I could probably cut it a little deeper, is to give some flexibility and get a nice edge on the outside without doing it, on the outside, or having it come all the way through on the outside. It just ends up making it look a little nicer, more refined. So that piece sits on the ground. There's that, and then I need to do and you might be saying, well, gee, Colonel, you're cutting towards you. That's not safe. Here's the thing. It's not like I'm cutting open a box, so it's not like I'm making a quick motion like that. I'm literally just going very slow and very controlled, so I'm not really worried about cutting myself. I've cut myself. I've never cut myself that bad, but that's also because I'm very careful. If you don't feel comfortable with it, by all means, don't do it. But if you're in the interest of the craft, you're probably going to end up doing that, because quite honestly, it is the best way to do it. You get the most control, and it just makes life a heck of a lot easier. So now we're at this point. So I've got to look at how much of an angle that's at. See, this is almost like that. So, and these can be really tricky edges to get done, because you're meeting two edges together. So what I do is I'll squish it down a little bit, pull it back, squish it down, pull it back until you get to the point where you've got a good angle on it, and you got enough glue to where it's covered, but you can still move it, and that way you can get to the right angle that you want and let that glue sit, because you can always add more glue later. One thing I've always maintained is you want to be liberal with the glue. Maybe not on the first go, but you definitely, the more glue you add, the more likely things are going to stick together. And I've not had any major malfunctions using hot glue. That's not to say it's the best. It's not to say that you shouldn't try other things. Find what works for you. Hot glue just happens to work for me, so that's what I use. Now, do this edge. I should probably make sure I'm doing this on camera. If you get a little bit of glue on the outside, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You can always cut it off with a knife, or there's always an option to fix it. Sorry for jostling the camera around, but I need to get a better angle on things. Alright. Okay. Okay, there's that. Now, one disclaimer is I'll never claim to be the best out there. I'll never say that I'm not the worst. I do it the way I do it. And if I can help somebody learn how to do it, that's what counts. Okay, this goes to this side, I think. Yes. Yeah, it's not enough to really worry about, but I need a bevel on it. Just ever so slightly. Another thing that it's worth noting, if you're unhappy with an edge or whatever after you've assembled it, there are options. There's a lot of options to smooth things down, from just taking the knife to it to using a Dremel tool, some sort of rotary sanding bit. But those are completely acceptable. I would be careful of the dust, for obvious safety reasons, but you can definitely sand. If you have gaps, you can either try filling it with hot glue, or there's certain epoxies like caulk that are You want stuff that's sandable and paintable. You can use that to fill it in. There's a plethora of options out there. There's no one end-all be-all solution. Don't let anybody try to trick you into that. You as a builder need to find what works best for you. I'm the kind of person, I find what works for me and go with it, and I always advocate to any new builder, find what works for you and run with it. because the worst thing you can do is get yourself stuck on a thought that, oh gosh, there's only one way to do things, and if it doesn't work, what do I do? Don't ever get yourself into that kind of situation where you believe that, and just there's always more than one way to do something. It's just a matter of knowing it and figuring it out, or knowing that there's other ways to do it and then finding those other ways, whether it's by asking somebody or experimenting on your own or what have you. But never allow yourself to believe that there's only one method to do things. Because one of the best things you can do is to have just know multiple ways to do different or do the same thing, because different projects are going to work different. You know, you could be I could be working on this boot, and one way of doing it would work and another one wouldn't, but it might be vice versa on forearms. The basics, as long as you have the core skills, or the core knowledge of how something, or how to do something, like the cuts and that sort of thing, those basic steps will get you the farthest, because you'll see that, and then you'll be able to go, oh, well, I can try doing it like this, and son of a gun, it works. So never believe that there's only one way to do something. That's how you get stuck in a creative rut. And I don't know, I've always liked diversifying my knowledge portfolios. I like knowing different skills, different ways to do things, and that's something I've always enjoyed. Alright. Where the crap's the house? I think I'm confusing this piece for this piece. I am indeed. Okay, because that wasn't making a lick of sense. Alright, well, okay. And that's why you always have Pepakura open. Now, this piece has a couple of unnecessary wings on it, so we're just going to come off. Now see, already I can tell I made a mistake, but I can still basically pull it off, and that's what counts. And as hard as it is to follow the advice is still important. Just because you make one goof or mistake doesn't mean you're not very good or this or that. It just means you made an oopsie. Oopsies you can work with. You know, there are going to be times where you have to redo an entire piece, and it's frustrating. Oh, is it frustrating? But it's learning from what you did. You know, the hardest thing to do, one of the hardest things to get down with this whole armor building thing is scaling the armor. You wouldn't necessarily think that it's that hard, but it's a pain. It is a royal pain. You know, one thing, when I'm doing this, sometimes I will hard follow the lines as they are in the Pepakura, But sometimes if I kind of think that something's supposed to be a bit more rounded or whatnot, I'll call an audible basically and just fudge it in the cuts. Like this has some hard bends in it from periodically, but since I don't have the template piece and it's too difficult to eyeball, and this really realistically would have some curve to it, I'm just gonna fudge it. There's nothing wrong with fudging it a little bit. It's just the more comfortable you get doing this stuff, the more you can fudge something, and it'll generally turn out all right. It's all part of the creative process. And always learn different techniques. And never stop trying to learn. I like I've said earlier, I like finding different ways to do things. When I meet other builders, I will ask how they do it, and I'll say, well, this is the way I do it. What do you think of that? I'll try to get that input because that's that builds community. B, I might just learn something, and learning something's never a bad thing. I should say learning is rarely a bad thing. So we all have instances where we find out some information we'd rather not know. This is definitely one of those skills where it's honestly not as hard as it looks, but it can be intimidating to get started even. Just because it does look absolutely difficult. For the longest time, I was too afraid to start because I'm just like, well, what if I'm bad at it? What if I don't do very good? What if I screw up all the time? What if? And then I finally started doing it. It's like I discovered that it's not as hard as it. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's very time consuming, and it can. It's more intimidating. Its bark is worse than its bite. It's difficult, but it's not difficult. It's not impossibly difficult. Now, this is where I had that boo-boo earlier. So I forgot to bevel this edge. It's not impossible to fix, it's just much more of a pain in the dear ear. Oh, goody. It's sorry, project deadline for another project just came through, so we've got 2 weeks to get that done, which honestly shouldn't be that difficult. The problem is, however, we've got a lot of projects. So this is going to be a busy October for myself and my friends, for the MMB, for another one of our groups, the FTH. So it's gonna be fun. And I say that with sarcasm, but I also say it with honesty. It's gonna be fun. It's just there's a lot going on. So So it's both fun in the literal sense and fun in the, oh my, there's so much to do and not a lot of time to get it done kind of sense. I will say, if you live in the Detroit area or plan on being in the Detroit area on the first weekend of November, the Michigan Misfits will be attending UMACon in its annual, twice annual trip to downtown. The MMB usually makes an appearance at UMACon in the fall and the Midwest Media Expo in the spring. Since most of us are located near Detroit, it's one of those easy events for us to get to. We have a lot of fun. We have a lot of friends that are there. So it's always a good time to see everyone. The benefits to me outweigh any kind of pitfalls like that, because they're just so gosh darn easy to work with. It also makes emergency repairs so much easier, because all you need is a hot glue gun, hot glue, and an outlet to be able to fix whatever problem you got. You don't have to wait so long to let it set. There's always good things and bad things about different adhesives and materials and this and that and the other thing. There's always going to be a plus and there's always going to be a minus. It's all about finding what, works best for you. Some people don't do well with foam and they prefer to do Pepicure, do paper and resin. That's great, but it's more work than I'm personally ready to give something at this point, or at this juncture of my life. I need to stop doing stuff off camera. That's what I need to stop doing. Now, this doesn't quite look like the model, but it's going to look close enough. No, if there's, I'm trying to use a model built for paper with foam. It's not going to be perfect. Oh dear. Apologies if I seem a little distracted. Lieutenant Azimuth is regaling us in a tale in the conditions that he was out on patrol at work. Apparently the waters in Lake Erie are less than favorable. And that was not a recommended way to... Now, this gap shouldn't be there, but it's a real complicated gap, so I don't really care. Once you got the base piece, hang on, once you have the base piece done like so, I generally go in here and try to get my glue gun to work. And I'll go in and I will just put more glue in the different seams and whatnot, just to make sure everything burns my fingers. This is where that, when I said you want to use a liberal amount of glue, comes into play. Is once you got the piece essentially put together, it's time to go in and reinforce all the areas so that they hold their shape and so that they have less likelihood of coming apart. Now, you're always going to have breaks, you're going to always have tears. It's just, it's the nature of foam. But adding in extra glue on the seams and whatnot helps minimize how much is going to happen. Because the more you minimize that, the better off you're going to be in the long run, because you're going to have to do fewer repairs and have fewer emergency repairs needing to be done. It also makes regular repairs and maintenance that much easier. The first time you go out and troop in armor is always your best time to, at least afterwards, find, okay, what worked, what didn't, what fit best, what needs a little bit of improvement. That's the good shakedown. Sometimes you can get it, if you have enough time, you can get that shakedown done before a convention, before you go out and troop, but you don't always have that. So you gotta do it as you can. And with that, essentially a boot toe. It's not perfect. There's things I probably should have done that I didn't. Moving forward to the heel, I will definitely endeavor to do better. But that's the toe. It's, like I said, it ain't perfect, but it'll get the job done. Now we can start looking at the heel, which is actually quite a bit simpler than the rest of it. Apologize for the yawning. Oh, thank you. As you can see, I'm working on the heel part now. Just trying to get these recessed correctly. And hello. And just gluing. Every day I'm gluing. And if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to ask them. And I'll try to not have my head too stuck into what I'm doing. Right. I had a thought, or I thought I had a thought. And another thing to remember for when building these things is a lot of times it's going to look iffy while it's still raw, but once you get some paint on there, paint has a good tendency to hide a lot of sins, as the saying goes. It's a good hider of oopsies, in my experience. Especially if you get the right paint job. I know even on my primary armor, it's there's some oopsies. There's some definite oopsies, but you can't really see them with the paint job it has. It's kind of. Now, I will say this does not reflect the time and agony of tracing everything out. Or, well, it doesn't. Printing it out, cutting it out of the, or cutting the templates out, tracing it onto the foam, and then cutting out the foam pieces. This only demonstrates the assembly part of it. The rest of the process is quite much more aggravating. The putting together process is so much more fun and rewarding. I again apologize for the train sounds. That's not much I can do about that, and it's really annoying. Think it's bad as a listener? Try living here. Well, I think I'm going to take a break from this, so until next time, ladies and germs, I'm COL Fork, and happy building.